The lock disengaged with the soft beep I'd programmed myself, the familiar chime of our smart home system welcoming me back to our house in the 12 South neighborhood. I dropped my overnight bag just inside the door and let out a long breath. 3 days in Memphis, pitching a full rebrand to a regional hospital chain had wrung me dry, and all I wanted was a glass of cold water, my couch, and the solid warmth of my husband somewhere nearby. I hadn't told him I was catching the early train. I wanted to surprise him. The front room was dim, afternoon light filtering through the linen curtains I'd spent 2 weekends hunting down. His keys were on the entryway table. So was a second set I recognized immediately, a rose gold keychain with a tiny Eiffel Tower charm that my best friend had brought back from a Paris trip 2 years ago and never let anyone forget about. I felt something warm and domestic bloom in my chest. They were probably watching a movie. She'd always liked him in the easy, uncomplicated way best friends like each other's husbands. I set down my bag quietly, thinking I'd startle them both, enjoy the shrieks and the laughter. I was halfway up the stairs when I heard his voice. The tone of it stopped me cold, low and unhurried and completely unlike anything he used with me anymore. Not the clipped efficiency of a man who spent his evenings on his laptop reviewing site plans. Not the performative warmth he offered at dinner parties. This was something stripped bare and honest in its wrongness, and I understood before my mind could form the words what I was hearing. I did not go to the door. I stood on the third step from the top, one hand on the railing, and I listened to the sounds coming from our bedroom with the same detached precision I brought to dissecting a client's failing brand identity. My brain cataloged everything, the rhythm of it, her voice, a sound I had heard almost every day for 11 years, shaped into something I had never been meant to know. I walked back down the stairs. I picked up my bag. I sat down in my own living room in the dark, and I opened the app on my phone for the interior security camera we'd installed after a rash of neighborhood break-ins last winter. The one he'd said he kept forgetting to check. The one whose login credentials he'd never asked for because, as he always said with that easy, dismissive wave, "You handle all the tech stuff, babe." The footage loaded. I watched it once with no expression at all. Then I downloaded it to a private folder on my cloud account, the one under my maiden name that predated our marriage. Then I drove to a Walgreens 3 miles away, bought a bottle of water and a pack of gum I didn't want, and sat in the parking lot until the numbness hardened into something I could use. I drove home and walked back inside and called out, "Honey, I'm back." The train was early. The scramble from upstairs lasted almost 45 seconds. When my husband appeared at the top of the stairs, his hair was slightly damp and his smile was 1 beat too wide. Behind him in the hallway I could see the guest bathroom door closing. "You didn't text," he said. "I know. I wanted to surprise you. Did it work?" He came down and hugged me, and I pressed my face against his shoulder and breathed evenly and did not pull away. My best friend came out of the guest bathroom with her hair down and her lipstick freshly applied, and she crossed the room and squeezed both my hands and said she'd stopped by to drop off the book she'd borrowed and got to talking and she'd missed me had I eaten. She could order from that Thai place we loved. I said I was exhausted and just needed to sleep, and her eyes did something small and careful behind her smile that I filed away. That night I lay beside my husband in our bed and I stared at the ceiling and made a decision with the same methodical certainty I use when I'm pulling apart a client's visual identity down to its bones. I was not going to flinch. I was not going to cry and confront and be managed. I had something they didn't know I had, and I was going to use it. I had 3 days of footage. The performance that followed was the work of my life. I went quiet in the way a stressed, overworked woman goes quiet. I blamed the Memphis pitch. I said I was drained. My husband accepted this with the easy fluency of a man who had long ago stopped looking too closely. He was attentive in a surface way, bringing me coffee in the mornings, asking about the hospital account with just enough interest to seem present. I watched him text with the phone tilted slightly away from me and I said nothing. My best friend came over for our usual Thursday evening, the ritual we'd kept for a decade, wine and takeout and whatever show we were working to together. She sat across from me on my own couch, in the house she'd just been in 2 days earlier for a different reason entirely. And she was so good at it that I almost admired her. Almost. She'd been pushing something for weeks. My husband's new venture, a mixed-use development project in East Nashville, a stretch of land he'd been assembling parcels on for 2 years. He'd been asking me to consider investing my grandmother's inheritance, the money I'd received 4 years ago and kept entirely separate in a private account, untouched. He framed it as us building something together. He framed it as legacy. She framed it the same way now, leaning forward with her wineglass cradled in both hands, her voice pitched to the frequency she used when she wanted something to sound inevitable. "It's not just real estate," she said. "He's got anchor tenants lined up, a boutique hotel flag, a food hall operator. The financing is almost closed, but he needs a private capital partner to bridge the gap before the institutional money comes in. Someone whose name doesn't complicate the lending structure." She smiled. "Someone the bank knows is clean. Someone whose name doesn't complicate the lending structure." I let the phrase settle in the back of my mind, like a stone dropping into still water. "I hear you," I said. "I want to understand it better. Can you send me the deck?" She beamed. "I'll have him send it tonight." I watched her drive away from the upstairs window, and then I sat down at my desk and typed into the search bar the name of the title company listed on the property tax notice I'd found filed in his desk 3 weeks ago, when I'd been looking for our car insurance renewal and had started, quietly, to look for other things too. The company was called Meridian Title Group. I wrote down the address. I wrote down the name of the managing partner printed at the bottom of a form letter I found in the same folder. The name was Vance. Not Vance. The name was Garrett. Denise Garrett. But the address was 4 blocks from his office, and the photo on the Meridian Title Group website showed a woman with the same strong jaw and direct eyes as my husband. Different last name. Different life. But I had learned, in the past week, to look at things I had previously chosen not to examine. I drove to Meridian Title Group on a Tuesday morning and asked to speak with someone about a property title inquiry for a jointly held marital asset. The receptionist brought me to a small conference room. The woman who walked in 2 minutes later stopped when she saw me. She was maybe 3 years younger than my husband, with his same dark coloring and a wariness around her eyes that looked practiced and old. She held a folder to her chest like a shield. "You're his wife," she said. It wasn't a question. I said yes. She closed the door and set the folder on the table and sat down across from me and looked at me for a long moment. The way someone looks at a problem they have been turning over in their mind for a long time without a solution. "How much do you know?" she asked. I told her about the footage. I told her about the investment pitch. I told her about the phrase that had snagged in my brain like a splinter. Someone whose name doesn't complicate the lending structure. She closed her eyes briefly. Then she opened them and told me what she knew. The East Nashville development wasn't what he'd described. The anchor tenants weren't signed. The boutique hotel flag was a letter of intent from a brand notorious in regional real estate circles for collecting LOIs and never closing. The food hall operator had filed for bankruptcy protection in another state 6 months ago under a different corporate name. The institutional financing he claimed was coming in wasn't committed capital. It was a term sheet from a lender with a predatory fee structure and a buried provision that would transfer controlling interest in the parcels to the lender upon any default. He needed private money that looked legitimate to keep the lender from calling the gap. He needed a co-signer on a bridge loan whose personal financial history was clean, unencumbered, and entirely above suspicion. He needed my grandmother's inheritance to be the thing that made the whole structure look like a real investment and not a desperate man papering over a hole. He'd shown the same pitch to his sister 6 months earlier. She had said no. He had called her paranoid. He had not spoken to her in 4 months. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked her. "He's your brother." She looked at her hands on the table. "My mother has been sick for 2 years," she said. "He's had power of attorney over her accounts since last spring. There are withdrawals I can't account for. I've been trying to find a way to look at the full picture without tipping him off." She raised her eyes. "You just walked in here with the full picture." The silence between us was the kind that comes before a decision that can't be unmade. I reached into my bag and set my phone on the table between us with the cloud folder open. She looked at it for a moment. Then she said, I have a notary friend who specializes in estate fraud cases, and I know an attorney who handles exactly this kind of predatory lending structure." She paused. "And I've been logging every wire transfer from our mother's account for 6 weeks." "What do we do first?" I asked. She looked at me with her brother's eyes and none of his charm. "First," she said, "we make sure your money is somewhere he cannot touch it. Today, right now, before you leave this room." I moved the inheritance that afternoon through a series of steps the attorney she connected me to had outlined: a new account at a separate institution, a brief paper trail that made the transfer look like a routine reallocation to a CD. I went paperless on all statements. I set up a second email address through a provider my husband had never heard me mention and started routing every piece of correspondence related to the coming months there. The attorney's name was Patricia O'Coffer. She wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck and spoke to me in the calm, precise way of someone who had sat across from a great many women in my position and had learned not to waste a single word. She reviewed the footage. She reviewed the pitch deck he'd emailed me the day after my best friend's visit. She reviewed the title documents his sister had been quietly photographing and forwarding. She asked me 3 questions I didn't want to answer, and I answered all of them. Then she told me what I was dealing with. The bridge loan structure was a trap with my name on it. If I signed as co-investor and the deal collapsed, the personal guarantee language in the lending documents would expose me to a deficiency judgment that could reach into my separate property. The lender's principals had done this before with other projects in other cities. The attorney had opposing counsel files on 2 of them. He wasn't just cheating on me. He'd been building a financial exit that required my name and my money to survive long enough for him to emerge clean and leave me holding the wreckage. "My job," Patricia said, closing her notepad, "is to make sure that doesn't happen. Your job is to keep him believing it still can." "She's never done this before," I said. "My best friend. I don't understand what she gets out of it." His sister looked at me from across the conference table. "They've been closer than you knew for a long time," she said. "She invested in the last project, a smaller one, 2 years ago. She lost it. She's trying to recover by staying close enough to get into this one on better terms. She thinks she's his partner. She doesn't know he'll do to her exactly what he plans to do to you." I went home that evening and made dinner and told my husband that I'd been looking more carefully at the development deck, that it was more sophisticated than I'd initially given it credit for, that I thought I'd been letting fear make my decisions for too long. He put down his fork and looked at me with an expression I recognized as relief, wearing the costume of encouragement. "That's all I've been waiting to hear," he said. His voice was warm with a feeling that had nothing to do with me. "I know," I said, and smiled at him. Over the following 3 weeks, I was his most enthusiastic convert. I asked questions in meetings he arranged with the lender's representative, a compact man who wore expensive watches and spoke in the vague, forward-leaning language of people whose business model depends on others not asking for specifics. I took notes. I asked for supplemental documentation. I said I wanted to understand the full picture before I committed. My husband interpreted every request as due diligence performed by a woman getting comfortable with a major decision. He texted my best friend after each session, brief exchanges I'd been reading since the 3rd day of this, using the secondary login on the phone account that he'd forgotten I had access to as the account holder. She texted back with the same running tally of enthusiasm she'd been performing to my face. The documentation they kept sending me was the most useful part. Every prospectus, every projection, every email from the lender's office went directly to Patricia and to a forensic accountant she'd retained named Simmons, a quiet man who communicated exclusively in numbered bullet points and had a particular gift for finding the gap between what a financial document claimed and what the underlying transactions actually showed. Within 10 days, he had traced 2 prior wire transfers from my husband's development LLC to an account linked to the lender's principals. The money had not gone toward project expenses. It had serviced a separate personal debt obligation. The arrangement was not a legitimate bridge loan structure. It was a fee extraction scheme with a pre-negotiated kickback. We had the emails, we had the wire records, we had the pitch deck with projections that Simmons annotated line by line. noting each figure that could not be supported by any documented market data. We had his sister's records of the unexplained withdrawals from their mother's accounts. We had everything. My best friend called me on a Friday afternoon. Her voice was different. Some of the bright performance quality had worn off, and underneath it was something that sounded like fear trying to hold a normal shape. "Have you made a final decision?" she asked. "He's getting pressure from the lender to close the private round by end of month." "I need a little more time," I said. The attorney I spoke with raised some questions about the personal guarantee language. A pause. "You spoke to an attorney?" "Just to review the documents. I want to be thorough." Her exhale was controlled. "Of course. That makes sense." She paused again. "Sam, you know I would never push you towards something that wasn't right for you. You know that, right?" "Absolutely," I said. "I've never doubted you for a second." After I hung up, I sat quietly for a moment. The name she had used, the name I had introduced her to my husband under 11 years ago, the name only people who had known me before everything else used, sat in the air like a small ringing bell. I texted his sister. "She's getting nervous." The reply came quickly. "Good. Nervous people make mistakes." The annual awards dinner of the Nashville Commercial Real Estate Council was held every October at the Grand Hyatt downtown, a ballroom dressed in the particular ambition of an industry that measures itself in square footage and closing prices. My husband was up for a rising developer recognition, a distinction he had campaigned for quietly for 2 years. He had reserved a table for 8. My best friend would be there. His professional partners would be there. The lender's representative would be there. The whole architecture of his carefully constructed image would be in one room on one night, and it was the night Patricia Okafor had circled on the calendar 3 weeks earlier when she'd said, "When we move completely." I wore a dress the color of deep water, structured and deliberate, the kind of dress you put on when you want to communicate that you have already made every decision you are going to make. His sister arrived separately and found me at the bar before the program began. She looked composed in a way that I understood by now meant she had been preparing for this for a long time. "The lender's representative is at the back table," she said quietly, accepting a glass of water from the bartender. "He doesn't know I've been documenting the transfers. He doesn't know you've spoken to Patricia. And my brother doesn't know that the silent co-investor he told the lender he'd already secured is not you." I looked at her. "What do you mean?" She allowed herself a small, precise smile. "I submitted a letter 2 days ago to the lender, copied to the council's ethics board, informing them that no co-investment commitment has been made by any private individual affiliated with this project, and that the representations made to that effect constitute a material misstatement in the loan application." She sipped her water. "The ethics board contacted the lender this morning for clarification. The lender is here tonight because they have not yet reached my brother. He doesn't know the floor is already gone." I looked across the ballroom at my husband standing at the center of his table, working the room with the easy practiced warmth of a man who had never once believed he could be outmaneuvered. My best friend was at his side, laughing at something one of his colleagues had said, her hand briefly touching his arm in the small, practiced way I had learned to notice. I found Patricia near the entrance where she'd been waiting with a courier who carried a manila envelope and the slightly tired look of someone who'd done this before. She nodded at me. The program began at 7:30. The council president, a broad-shouldered woman named Margaret Holloway, who had built half the mixed-use corridor south of downtown, worked through the evening's recognitions with the efficient warmth of someone who genuinely loved the industry she'd given 30 years to. My husband's category came near the end. When his name was announced, he rose with the easy confidence of a man collecting what he already believed was his. He buttoned his jacket. He smiled at the table. He looked once at my best friend, and she touched her glass in a small private toast. He was halfway to the podium when Margaret Holloway's assistant stepped to her side and whispered something into her ear. I watched Margaret's expression process the information with the contained professionalism of someone accustomed to managing surprises. She turned back to the microphone. "Before we continue," she said, "I've been asked to allow a brief statement from a member of our community regarding a matter of professional concern to this council." She looked toward the back of the room. Mrs. O'Coffer. The room shifted. My husband stopped walking. Patricia moved to the podium in the direct, unhurried way she moved through every room and adjusted the microphone with the practiced ease of someone entirely comfortable with silence. "Thank you," she said. "My name is Patricia Okafor, and I represent a client in a matter that directly concerns the integrity of a project currently seeking private capital from members of this professional community." She opened the folder in front of her. The East Nashville development known as Meridian Crossing has been represented to at least one potential private co-investor and to the project's bridge lender as having secured anchor tenant commitments and institutional capital that does not, in fact, exist. The letter of intent from the hotel flag expired without renewal 4 months ago. The food hall operator is currently under creditor protection in the state of Texas. The bridge lender's principals have received payments from the project LLC that constitute undisclosed kickbacks in violation of standard lending covenant, as the room had the quality of a space where someone has just broken a glass, that specific frozen second before everyone decides what to do. Patricia continued for 3 more minutes. She cited document numbers. She cited wire transfer dates. She cited the ethics board notification that had gone out that morning. She did not raise her voice. She did not pause for effect. She spoke the way someone speaks when they've done their homework so thoroughly that drama becomes unnecessary. When she finished, she stepped back and the room broke open. My husband had not moved from the spot where he'd stopped walking. The color had left his face in the way. Color leaves a face when the body understands something before the mind is ready to. He looked at the podium, and then he looked at his table, and then, with the slow, terrible comprehension of a man watching a building he constructed fall floor by floor, he looked at me. I was already standing. I walked to him through the crowded room, past his colleagues who moved aside without quite knowing why, past the lender's representative who had risen from the back table with his phone already in his hand, past my best friend who stood with one hand pressed to her collarbone and an expression I had last seen on her face when she was 23 years old and had been caught in a lie she thought was small enough to survive. I stopped in front of my husband. I had rehearsed several things to say in this moment. I had discarded all of them. What I said instead was very simple and entirely true. "I found everything," I said, "every document, every transfer, every message. Your sister helped me understand what I was looking at. Patricia is filing the divorce petition tonight. The ethics board has everything they need. The DA's office has been copied on the lender documentation." He looked at me, and for a moment I saw something underneath the fear and the outrage, something that might have been the ghost of the man I had believed he was, ashamed and briefly real. It passed quickly. "You had no right," he said, his voice low and tight. "I had every right," I said. "You gave me one when you decided I was a resource instead of a person." I stepped back. His sister had appeared at my side, her expression entirely calm. She looked at her brother with the particular sadness of someone who has grieved a thing so long that the funeral is almost a relief. "I tried to warn you," she said to him. "Not for the last time." Security had reached us by then. Margaret Holloway had resumed control of the room with the authority of someone who had not built a career in commercial real estate. By losing composure, the lender's representative was already outside, his phone to his ear. My best friend had not moved from beside the table. She watched me walk past her toward the exit, and I did not stop or slow or look back, because there was nothing there I needed to see anymore. Outside the ballroom, the air was cool and the city noise was the ordinary, comfortable noise of a Tuesday evening. His sister walked beside me, and we stood at the top of the hotel steps for a moment without speaking. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Empty," I said. "But it's a clean kind of empty. Like a room you finally finished clearing out." She nodded. "That's where it starts," she said. "In 6 months that room will be full of things you chose yourself." We walked to our separate cars. Patricia texted as I drove home, "Petition filed, assets frozen, pending hearing, lock changed per court order effective tonight. Make sure you have somewhere to stay." I drove to the apartment I had quietly leased 2 weeks earlier. A 1-bedroom in a building on Wedgwood with big east-facing windows and a balcony I'd already put a single potted rosemary plant on. I had moved nothing from the house yet. The apartment contained a mattress, a lamp, my laptop, and a box of things from my studio at the house that I had relocated there over 4 separate unhurried visits while my husband was at the office. It was enough. More than enough. I sat on the floor of the empty living room with my back against the wall and my laptop open, and I worked for 2 hours on the rebrand proposal for the Memphis hospital, which was due Friday and was actually very good. The kind of work that reminded me why I'd chosen this in the first place. Around midnight, I made tea and stood on the small balcony and looked at the city I had lived in for 7 years, and felt, under the exhaustion and the unresolved grief, the first faint edge of something that was not surviving but actually living. His sister texted me a week later. Our mother's attorney has found 2 years of irregular withdrawals. He's cooperating with the estate investigation to reduce his exposure on the lending fraud. She sent a second message a few seconds after. She's asking about you. She wanted me to tell you she's sorry for what you walked into. I read the messages twice. I replied, "Thank you for everything. I mean all of it. What you did took a different kind of courage than what I did." She replied, "We both just stopped pretending we didn't see what we were looking at." The divorce settled 4 months later. The marital house sold 4 months later. The project LLC was unwound under court supervision, and the lender's kickback arrangement became the subject of a separate federal inquiry that was, Patricia told me with a thin, satisfied smile, entirely not our problem. My best friend was named in a civil fraud suit by 2 other people who had been shown the same pitch under different pretenses. Last I heard, she had moved back to her hometown in Ohio. I did not contact her. I did not need to. I kept the studio. I kept the clients. I kept the inheritance intact and untouched, and eventually used a portion of it to buy into a small creative agency started by a woman I'd met through a professional association, a partnership built on actual paperwork reviewed by actual attorneys, transparent and documented, and nothing like a promise made in a living room to someone whose eyes were already elsewhere. On the first warm Saturday of the following spring, I drove out to the East Nashville corridor, where the development parcels still sat empty and fenced, waiting for whoever came next to decide what they were worth and what they might become. I parked and looked at the land for a few minutes. Then I drove to a sister's house where we had gotten into the habit of having coffee on weekend mornings when she wasn't working, a new habit that had built itself quietly from the ashes of the old life, and I told her what I'd seen. She thought about it for a moment, both hands wrapped around her mug. "Empty lots," she said. "You know what they actually are?" "What?" "Whatever the next person decides to build." I drove home with the windows down and the radio up, and somewhere on the bridge over the Cumberland I started laughing, not the brittle performance laugh I had used for months, but the real kind, unburdened and surprised. The kind that means you have gotten yourself back from somewhere you were afraid you'd lost for good and found that what came back was actually better than what was taken.